minutes, and then we follow with a panel. Brian asked me to bring a global perspective as we do student housing around the world, as well as put it in a context where Canada sits within this global student housing context. So I will be bringing a result of all Canada research that we have done in the last 2 years and announcing some of the data that come out of it. My mission is really to bring a bit more transparency and reliability to the market at the same standards as the student housing has in more mature markets, and enable communication and connections in between the investors, universities, banks as underwriters of the debt, operators and developers. So a bit about Bonnard so that you know where the data is coming from. So we are a professional research and advisory firm focused on student housing. We are not a broker, we are a consultant, so independent, certified and compliant with high-level standards. We are global, 15 years of existence, now more than 100 people in 4 offices. We work with about 700 investment groups around the world involved and engaged in student housing, 250 portfolios, 250 markets and sub-markets around the world, and monitor and collect data about 13,000 assets in student housing and 1,000 in a pipeline. We measure the sector across the demand, supply, rents, pipeline, forecasting, feasibility studies, financial appraisals and valuations, and successfully concluded over 520 projects that we advised. In Canada, we have had the chance to do business here for 12 years already, but primarily we did business with the government in Ottawa, with provinces, with sector associations, so Universities Canada, colleges, as well as Languages Canada, as you will see on the panel. So we have had the chance to sit on a demand and the customers that are knocking on the door of student housing. And about 2 years ago, we started documenting Canada to bring the data on a level as we have in US, UK, Europe, Australia. We also did field visits. So this research I will be announcing you is coming from the visits of almost all the private student housing properties and some on-campus public stock. As well as the industry stakeholders conversations we had with many of you, and some of you are already our clients, so that's even deeper conversation. So I get to the point. The student housing started about 20 years ago in US, 15 years in UK, 10 years in Europe, 5 years in Australia, and now it's in childhood in Canada. While in other countries, this is an established asset class, and there are doubts whether this is an alternative or mainstream. In Canada, it's a new one. All kinds of investors are already invested in student housing around the world, institutional, private equity, REITs, family offices, high net worth individuals. In Canada, we are not there yet. And while the annual transactions in student housing globally are around 20 billion, in Canada, as I had the conversation with Derek, I'm not sure whether he's here, it's close maybe to $1 billion in the last couple of years. So while in other countries, the average of a proportion of a private stock to public stock is 33%, in Canada is only 26%. Globally, we have over 400 portfolios. It means owners of more than 2 assets. In Canada, we have only 11, and only 3 have more than 3,000 beds. Yields are quite high and not compressed yet, so it's a beautiful game that is coming. While in Germany, we transact for 3.3 or 2.8 in Hamburg recently, and there is not much where to go. On the other hand, the average growth of students globally is about 4 to 5%. It depends on the destination, but in Canada, it's 11%. So it's a great market to be invested in student housing in such an environment when the number of students, especially students with money, is growing. So, by the way, the presentation will be available later on, so that you will be having a chance to study it more in detail at home. So, as you can see, the all stock, public, private, and religious that we measure over here, segmented down to countries. We skip the US over here as this is a market of its own. So UK, France, and Germany are the most saturated markets in this sense. Canada has also large stock, but big proportion of it is public. As you can see on next slides, the proportion of a private stock is really small here, and that's the challenge here. In terms of students, especially international students, as you can see, I wanted to demonstrate a bit the bigger picture here. The average growth rate of international students is 11.7% in Canada, which adds about 46,000 students every year, and 2% domestic students. So there is a growth, while in many other countries it's a decline, which adds additional about 40,000 students a year. So Canada has the fastest pace of growth of students, and is not far from Australia, as you see. If you see the 2021 numbers for Australia, still Canada is not there yet, but very close. And proportionally, it's not far from the UK. So while Canada is, by population, not such a big country, but student population, it's a superpower. And you're probably not aware of it. The market position is fantastic. Now it's the fourth biggest market. The fundamentals are great because strategically government is supporting increase of international students and already having a big number. So when you compare Canada as a student housing market, you should compare to UK, to Australia, to Germany, so those big heavyweights with 400,000 students and more. And that's probably relevant. Moreover, none of these other powers or superpowers grow as fast as Canada. So from investment point of view, you are large enough and growing fast enough for further big investments. Provision rates, to see what's the saturation and how far you are to reaching cap. Well, very far. So the average provision rate across Canada, in all 16 cities that we measure, is 12%. But the private stock is only 26, so the saturation in the UK is 34, but the private stock represents 51%. In Australia, the private stock represents 69%. 68. In the US, 69. So what you can probably see over here is that the saturation is not so different across the countries and continents, but the internal structure of the stock is rather different. And if Canada is at par with the UK in terms of the public-private division of the stock, Canada is missing 33,000 private beds. So I will run through a couple countries to see how they're doing in terms of major factors like demand, supply, pipeline, rents, and then I dive deeper to Canada so that you have it in a context. So US, as I mentioned, is a market of itself, so it's difficult to go in details. So we selected some of the universities where you can see the student population and the caliber or size of the demand, followed by the supply. So when you compare the saturation, the private and public beds provided by universities and private sector around US universities, the saturation of provision rate is 50 to 60%, while in Canada it's about 12. When it comes to pipeline, it's massive. Every average American city is developing as much of a pipeline as entire Canada. So pipeline here is about 9,348 beds as of today in Canada. But the bigger cities in US, they are delivering it only in one city. Rent levels, I want to say that all dollar figures you will see in these presentations are done in US dollars. So even when I talk about the Canadian context, so that we as a global company, so that we have a global benchmark, you will see it in US dollars. So over here you can see the rents and the rent levels across the geographies. And that's for the US. So now I dive deeper to UK for the same factors. So over here we can see a split of domestic and international students. You will see the same slides for Canada and Canadian cities. Over here the proportion of international students is rather greater, which means that the stock is done the way that it not only pleases the domestic mobile students, but also the international students. So more single rooms, more studios, better locations, etc. This is beds in private versus non-private, or on-campus, off-campus. In the UK and European all cities, it's the distribution of the universities is a little bit different. So it's difficult to talk about on-campus, off-campus. So that's why globally the segmentation is in private, non-private. And you can see over here that almost everywhere the private stock creates 50% and more of the overall supply. Pipeline, just for the context, so like in cities like London, Paris, we have about 100 projects in the pipeline per city. And as you can see that the student housing, as it matured already after 15 or 10 years, and with the more meal, there is more appetite. So there is sort of more demand for a better quality stock rather than flat sharing. Then the pipeline is still strong. So even though the provision rate is 51%, there is more appetite for more stock to be built. Rent levels. So obviously, this is a single room. Probably a little definition. Single room is just a bed, no bathroom and no kitchenette in the room. While studio, by definition, is bed and bath parity plus the kitchenette in the room. Average sizes are 18 square meters net carpet area, and that's basically what we measure across the world. So as you can see in London, which is probably not a benchmark because there are only few cities like London, the rents are really high. But when we look at the secondary cities, then they are not even as high as in Canada. We will see Australia, that's a different story. But just to give you a taste of where the markets are. Single studio, that's now the most common product in the world to be built in student housing. So you can see that the dollar figures are rather different, usually 20 to 30% more than single room. And climbed up even in the secondary cities to sort of in private sector to $1,300, $1,400 per month. Australia, which might be the closest comparable in terms of size and maturity of the market. So basically, there are 6 sub-markets that make sense for student housing investment. The proportion of international students is enormous because this is a strategic interest to replace mining with education as a top export sector for Australia. So the pushing to 1 million international students by 2025. So that's why we see such a big proportion. And when we had the conversation with the Australian government that we also advised about 2015, they understood they will never get to 1 million students if they don't provide student housing supply. So the government stepped in sort of adjusted the regulations, make it easier for the investors and developers. And now the student housing is coming like 30,000 pipeline in one city. Over here we can see the proportion private to non-private. As I said, the majority of the stock is private. Globally, we can say, as a rule of thumb, that the new stock that is coming to the market, 90% is delivered by private sector, not public sector. So we had other conversations next door that the universities don't sit on so much cash and investments as private investors. So more and more universities find a way how to let the professional investors to use their equity and their financing options to bring the projects to life. Pipeline. So as you can see that in construction, pipeline in construction is the blue. So it's quite massive. Melbourne alone is delivering almost 10,000 beds as we speak. Rents are quite high. That's mostly because Australia made a little bit of a overshoot in a way that 90% of the stock is built for Chinese students. They struggle now because, as one of the speakers earlier today mentioned, that the structure of the demand is changing towards the more affordable. And then Indian students have a different preferences, so they share the room, they have different budget. So Australia has really high rents. It's about, in the top cities, close to $2,000 Australian, sometimes 2,200. So average price is $550 per week for a studio. When you put it together with the cost of tuition, then Canada becomes much more competitive. This is for a studio. So you can see when in American dollars, this is about $15,000, $16,000 per month per studio in the tier 1 cities. And now we go to Canada. So we selected 12 cities for today to show you. You can see total number of students per each city and a split structure to domestic students and international students. When we measure the 235 cities around the world, we segment them to big, medium, and small, so more than 100,000 students, 50 to 100,000 or less. So Canada has 2 big cities, Toronto and Montreal, having more than 100,000 students, 3 medium, so Vancouver, Edmonton, and Ottawa, and the rest are small education hubs, or smaller education hubs in terms of international total students. When we flip it in terms of number of international students, then Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver are obviously the leaders, followed by Ottawa, Waterloo, and Winnipeg. When it comes to beds in private and non-private, that's a totally different picture. As I mentioned to other destinations, the public stock is pretty dominant, so 3/4 of the stock is still public on campus. Pipeline. So as you can see, the pipeline in construction, which is the dark blue, is in single-digit thousands, which is pretty accurate for the current market status, which will, the market will mature, the confidence will increase, the financing will be better, the zoning will be more sort of relaxed, and I'm sure that when I compare the maturing of other countries 10 years ago, then probably in 2 to 3 years we will see a much stronger wave of investment, which will be sort of quite natural. We had the speakers' reception yesterday, a conversation that really the market is reaching the level of transparency, track record, operational data, investment interest, demand is there, So there are all the fundamentals that need to be now coupled with the macro fundamentals, as the keynote speaker mentioned to us earlier today, that inflation and higher cost of capital is making people to rent more than buy, taking places from students. They are more forced to residential student accommodation, and therefore the interest for renting and student housing will only naturally increase. So basic fundamentals will be now coupled with the macroeconomics, and student housing is now generally considered as the safe haven for capital, because there are not so many opportunities in other asset classes to invest. So rents, I probably jump to single studio. So this is out of the all stock in Canada, making the top and bottom line as well as the averages, as you can see, per city, and broken down to private and public stock. Again, for those who came later, this is in American dollars, or US dollars, so that we have comparable across the destinations. So we see that even though we've heard earlier today that the rents are high, they are still quite affordable in the general global context, and the rents are still at a rather in a good zone of affordability, and coupled with the lower tuition in Canada than other destinations, this is quite an attractive proposition. For this occasion, we made an infill survey here in Toronto, and we interviewed students here on the street level, old-fashioned. We approached several hundreds of students, out of which we cropped a representative sample to see, where we are. It's not as large sample as I wish, but we quickly at least wanted to give you a taste. We interviewed students that are living in all types of accommodation, so on campus, off campus, renting a flat or any other, so that we have equal split. And we asked them about the propensity to move towards a structured private PBSA. Long story short, over here you can see that the major factor for a Canadian mobile student that needs a bed is location. So 54% would move to a private PBSA if it is within 15 minutes from the university or college. While for an international student that is probably a little bit more used to distances, the affordability is the issue. So if it is more than, or if it is less than $1,200, the student would move to private PBSA rather than living in a flat. Preferences. Over here, this is very much in line with the surveys and the sort of sound market check that we do, that the Wi-Fi is more important than air and water in the building. And communal areas are more important than the rooms. So when you look at the number 5, that's the furnishing of the room. So it's nowhere as important as the amenities or Wi-Fi. And it's very much in line with the product in other 10,000 buildings that we measure, that this is something that one needs to focus on. Investors usually are surprised that there is so little focus on the room and so much focus on the communal areas. But really, students not only pay for the roof, they pay for the services and community, and that's the premium. Also, of course, all in one bill, the flexibility, etc. Now, question about how we sort of call it market tolerance. So how much money the students have. So as you can see, the budget is about $2,800. So $2,080 is a budget for international and Canadian students per month. And this is in Canadian dollars, this one slide, okay? And then they spend about, the students of are ready to pay $1,700 and more for a studio that we show them on a picture on the street. So they have visual identification of what would they pay for, and they were willing to pay $1,700 and more for the product, which always has a little bias because in reality they are willing to pay more. And you can see that 81% of the students were willing to pay that amount. Normally, for the threshold that we measure, it's about 20 to 30%. So the market tolerance is really high. Then distribution of the product. So we visualize the data also to interactive maps so that clients, boards, and analysts can play with it. We can see also data to be distributed in a map. So the distribution of the stock in universities is rather difficult or different in Canada. So therefore, we create perimeters that create a rental benchmark and others. I see Brian is indicating me I should, yeah. So I probably skip transactions and leave it for Derek that is coming after me then. Transactions, just to give you an idea that 10 years ago, we also had in other countries 1 billion transactions for 3 years. Now it's 9 billion in Europe only. Yields spread delta in between the residential and student is about 100 bips. In less mature markets and about 25 bits in more mature markets like London. That's a story on the top line. On the bottom line, the yields in student housing still compress, and even in higher interest rates times. Weight of the capital is really stronger. I skip this, and then this is the second to last slide. This is a global benchmark for you to know where the world is in terms of NOI. So about 70% as a consolidated stock with mobilized occupancies. About $110,000 GDV per studio room. 6 to 7% initial development yield. Up to 35% OPEX and other costs, insurance, operators fee, etc. Sinking fund. The equity multiple is usually expected in between 1.8 to 2.3 in a 5 years investment cycle, including the development. The IRRs in terms of, depends on expectations of investors, but usually the reasonable achievable is 12 to 18% in a 5 years cycle, leveraged. And the average transaction value per bed in the world is 160,000 American dollars. Last slide with the slide message. If the growth of students in Canada continues as it is last year's, up to 2030, and the pipeline and construction continues only at the same pace as now, the provision rate, so bed to student ratio, will be less than it is now. And Canada will miss about 200,000 beds that will need to satisfy the benchmark of 20% provision rate, only 20% provision rate that is in other more mature markets. Now it doesn't look like, it's natural. But, as I said, with the meal, there is more appetite, and the students get used to it, and they have friends, and they recommend, and they want a proper, better accommodation, not to live in a shared apartment. With this, thank you very much, and I would like to invite the panelists. Great. Thank you for joining us. As you will be answering the first question, it would be nice if you introduce yourself at the time so that we save a round of introduction. And I start directly to the point. So the big story here in Canada is the demand and supply. So if you can share your perspective, we have two university representatives, we have two investor representatives, and one public sector representative, if I can call Gonzalo this way. Hybrid, okay. So where do you see this supply-demand gap in general and recently?
Hi, everyone. Ali Damji, Managing Partner Real Estate at Forum Asset Management. I think it really depends on the market. I mean, broadly, there is a significant supply shortage of housing, period, across this country. Where I see changes happening in demand and supply is depending on when a project got delivered. So for example, our project at York University, we just doubled our bed inventory full. Contrasting to that, we have a project at University of Manitoba right at the foot of the campus, and because of the university's message on when they were going to open and how open they would be, they only announced in June that they would be in class and not virtual. The demand on that asset has been a little lower. So I think it really depends when you delivered your project, how long it's been open, and the supply-demand dynamics around.
How do you compare the demand this academic year to previous years? Stronger?
In that particular case, tough to say because we just delivered that project. But at York University, certainly with what's going on in Toronto, very strong and stronger than the prior year.
Mm-hmm. Josh?
Josh Mitchell, Managing Director, Real Estate at University of Toronto. Great presentation, by the way. I don't know how much value we can actually add beyond that. But so at the University of Toronto, we're 85,000 students normalized to full-time equivalents, right? So it's actually more students than that, but that's FTE. We had specifically or roughly around 12,000 students look for housing, ask for housing, and we were able to accommodate 8,400, 8,500. So that is a significant undersupply of 3,500 units that we need to provide in the coming years as fast as we possibly can. We're looking to deliver 1,400 units in the next 3 years, but we're actually looking to add 4,000 units of housing, university housing, over the next 10 to 15 years through a four-corner strategy, which I've talked to a few about, but our four-corner strategy really is a double bottom line real estate strategy focused on university housing, innovation space, and retail. And of those 4,000 units of housing, it's not just student housing. We're also taking a look at faculty housing, student family housing, which is apartment-style living. We're even looking at home ownership options. So we're really seeing supply and demand as kind of more holistically university housing at broad. And we're looking for development partners specifically to help us with this four-corner strategy, specifically unlocking key pieces of land on campus to develop with partners. I'll say we're also looking at strategic acquisitions as well. That's just how much in demand student housing ultimately is. So we're constantly looking at hotels. We're looking to consolidate land. We announced 6 months ago that we're acquiring Knox College on campus, which will give us another 100 or so student housing rooms. But we're, to put it simply, we're undersupplied and we're trying our best to make a dent in it. But yeah, happy to talk further about it.
Great. Tracy?
Hello, everyone. Tracy Mason-Innes, Executive Director, Student Affairs at Simon Fraser University. And if you don't know where that's located, there's 3 campuses in the Vancouver area: Surrey, Burnaby, and downtown Vancouver. We have a housing master plan that is forecasted for 2035, I guess. And we've been slowly making progress with that. We have a partnership with Centurion for our phase 1 that opened up last year. And our phase 2 is part of the BC loan program, where we were able to borrow in order to build and run this residence that'll open up in February. We've also been gifted buildings here and there, and whether you call them acquisitions or just, surprise, here's a building you could use. So we just, 90 units on the university, the trust of SFU. The location is on the mountain. I think we're just looking to see how we're going to manage what you just talked about, which was fantastic data. We are seeing the demand. We build and our wait lists get longer. We close our applications earlier and earlier in the year. We're looking at first-year guarantees, which is something that many universities have, but SFU does not. So there's a lot of demands, and Indigenous housing is the other, I would say, priority for the university. So family, a mix of family, and also intergenerational family housing. So again, broadening the definition of what housing looks like on campus.
Connor, when we were preparing for this session on Monday, you shared the statistics. You have how many inquiries and how many beds you have. Would you mind to share?
Happy to get into it. So Connor Patterson, Chief Operating Officer at Varsity Communities. And I mean, the data Bonnard presented here and Samuel presented is fantastic. We are operators, third-party off-campus operators, and so our data or experience is a little more granular and on the site. And speaking specifically to supply and demand, it was a crazy year. We had 400% more leads than we had beds. And that's people saying, hey, I'm interested, I need a place to live. And then 200% more people who actually completed an application. They gave us their driver's license, void checks, we're ready to go. And twice as many people interested in living with us than we have beds available. And then, of course, you always feel really bad, but there's the people who show up at your doorstep on move-in day and say, like, I need a place to live. I've been, trying for a month. I just got acceptance, in August. And I'm trying to find a place to live, and we have to turn people away. And so, very real experience for many students this September, this fall. So.
Gonzalo, you represent 150,000 students that are coming to Canada.
No, I don't. Gonzalo Peralta, Executive Director of Languages Canada. And what Samuel means is that the language programs from the universities, colleges, and private sectors bring in 150,000 students every year. And that number just keeps on growing. So it's gotten so bad now that here are the anecdotes that I hear, okay? The uber wealthy ones, they're turning to buying condos instead of renting, even though they don't want to buy. And the ones that are not uber wealthy are living with cockroaches. It's gotten so bad, and somebody made the point earlier on. Immigration is growth for Canada. We don't have any other way. And when you have 650,000 international students, these are the ideal landed immigrants. We need at least 400,000 new people here every year just to maintain. And international students are a key pipeline, not only a key pipeline, perhaps the most strategically important pipeline. So when my members come to me and they say, and like these are great examples that everybody has shared, but when they come to me and they say, you know what? The demand is there. Everybody wants to come here, except now because of the visa backlog issue, but it's a bump on the road. But when they say everybody wants to come here, we are a superpower in this, but we don't have anywhere for them to sleep. This is a problem. And so we need solutions that are short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And that's a given. It's so important that I'm here today. And normally I would never come to an event like this one, but at this point it's becoming a crisis. So, and it's not going to abate for the next decade. So we need smart investment, and we need good places for our students to live. One other thing that I wanted to say is we speak a lot about international versus domestic. I was sharing with someone earlier. Remember when we used to say high tech? What happened to that term? We don't say high tech anymore, we just say tech. At some point, given the way the world is going, it's not going to be international education, it's just going to be education. So it's really important to look at the whole picture and make sure that things are moving forward in a way where we can, especially for Canada, where we can accommodate all students, including what we call now international students.
I would probably move from demand supply to a brick and mortar. And Josh, are we after COVID gonna build something different? I mean, more single rooms, more studios, or like.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I don't necessarily know if what I'm surprised to see is that students still are, post-COVID, fine bunkering up in quads and double rooms. Prior to the pandemic, we were starting to look at what we originally referred to as nomad units, and then we started to call them scholar suites, like individual units, because there was definitely a demand for that product. But we're starting to take a look at our portfolio and go, it's really a numbers game at this point. Like, students really are fine living in slightly smaller and smaller units. And to your point, they're looking at highly amenitized developments as well. So they're kind of less focused on what the bed ultimately looks like and the study space within their unit, and they're more looked at where's is it walking distance? What do the amenities look like? Is there actual food services in the building that are high quality? Those types of things. So I think coming out of the pandemic, we're really focused specifically on that. I would say too, in terms of international students, I couldn't agree more. It's such an important part of University of Toronto's enrollment. I mean, 30% of our students are international. 20% of them specifically are from China specifically, right? And when we look at 30% of those students, on average, about 30% of those students eventually become permanent residents as well. So talking about a feeder, like this really is their entry into Canada, and they want to stay here, and they're eventually going to want to be in the productive, broader real estate market. And so really looking at preferences for international students versus domestic, I think is something that we could do a better job at. But we're just trying to build as many units as humanly possible at this point.
Yeah, and I think I'll jump into. I think there's just a whole bunch of inventory that needs to be built of all different shapes and sizes. 4 bedrooms for people who are looking for the most affordable product. I think key things coming out of COVID that certainly I've seen is that you need the bed to bath parity. People are willing to pay a premium for that. And then looking at, I guess in Toronto, the average studio size of new residential condominiums being built is somewhere in the 450 square foot range. I was in London a couple months ago touring a smaller product where, you mentioned 180 square foot. If laid out well, that can be a really great product. UBC, they have a nano suite typology that's about 140 square feet. They have a massive waiting list because it is a truly affordable product, yet also delivers privacy that people are valuing more and more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one thing I'd mention as well, just from a lease-up perspective, like this past year, the things that leased up the quickest, studios and 1-beds, then the 2s, and then the 3s. And so it's a common pattern in many other markets. I really don't see it changing. COVID maybe impacted it for a bit, and people thought, studios, everyone's going to want their own place to live, and I think that's certainly still the case. But it's studios, then the 1s, then the 2s, then the 3s.
Okay.
I saw something different. I saw move-in day this year, and families and students picking what we have sort of like a different type of dorm style, I guess, or traditional style, where you have single rooms. And SFU only has single rooms. We've always had single rooms. But that the shared bathrooms are also private, and that's been really popular style. And affordability is key, and I'm really glad people are talking about it, because that's what I hear all the time being in student affairs, is affordability. So the meal plans, everything being predictable and stable is important for them. So the quicker they know the rents, they know how long they're going to stay the same, that's all important. And we've seen as the housing demand studies, as you increase the rents, they'll start to pick different types of housing, and that's just a reality.
I think something that universities certainly have to, keep a keen eye on. We're in an environment with rapidly rising construction costs, interest rate increasing, cap rate uncertainty, and so developers putting real private dollars at risk, need to earn a certain return. And so I think that's where the opportunity for more partnerships is key, because offloading some of that risk, potentially leveraging a university's balance sheet and cost of capital can help achieve that win-win outcome where we as the private sector are building more stock, yet also maintaining a level of affordability. I know, Josh, that's what you're trying to do.
No, 100%. I think we acknowledge. By partnering, we're able to really double up in terms of how many units we ultimately deliver over a 10 and 15 year period. We look at partnerships not just a way to kind of defer risk And we're an active partner. We're not doing triple net ground leases to developers on our campus. Not at all. I mean, we're always 50-50.
I wish you did.
I know you do. Lots of people do. But we want to be an active 50-50 joint venture partner. But what in addition to the equity being brought to the table, the actual financial economic deal, the design and construction expertise alone. I mean, we partner with Daniels on a student residence at Spadina in Sussex at I think it's a little over 500 rooms. And that project, there's some cost overruns, but it's very moderate versus, other U of T projects that are on campus that are more academic in nature. And so that value proposition is huge, right? That you partner with someone that actually really understands the design and construction side for, if it's apartment style living or even student residence, we're looking to partner for that very reason. On operational excellence, I mean, we operate in-house, but I think there's a lot of great operators out there as well that are filling that gap. And so it's great to see partnerships across the board, not just on the design and construction side, but on the operations side.
If I may, I move this topic to PPPs and partnerships, because from the previous experience from other markets, the investments could really kick off only if there was more communication, connection, etc. So my question is, and I probably start with Gonzalo, what should the parties do? So Gonzalo, you are very well connected through the government structures, you have professional lobbying, so maybe you can comment on that one. Maybe the universities can say what the private sector should do, what should be better. Maybe Connor and Ali could say, what the universities could do to really kick off the process faster. So Gonzalo.
Well, I mean, everybody has different interests over here. Some need to make money. Others want students to be safe. Others are looking for progressive policy, and so on. One of the most important things is actually to get the different elements together. I'll give you a little example. I have not heard once the word college. There are colleges in Canada. We talk about universities. What I'm trying to say is everybody needs to learn. So investors need to learn as much about colleges and private learning institutions as about universities. We all need to step back, and the educational institutions need to learn a lot more about investors and developers and so on. So that's the primary thing. And one of the key players in this is government. Whether it's local or provincial or federal, they need to be talking. I was talking with one MP who's so thirsty for resolution of this issue that we're discussing today. These are the people that change the regulations and the policies that allow us to resolve this overall issue. So one of the most important things to do is to sit down in conversation with all the different players, whether it be students, institutions, government, representative bodies like the one that I work for. This is absolutely key. And Canada being Canada, one of the things that we all know is it's going to be different in Ontario than in British Columbia, then everybody's going to do it slightly differently. So it's going to be a royal pain in the ass. But this is something that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. And thinking about university partnerships, I think in the opening panel, Henry Morton asked, what's your favorite line or one line that you really like? And maybe I'll use that here, is that we go farther, faster together. And partnerships, in particular with the private sector and private operators working with universities to maybe say, we can help solve the management problem, we can help solve the capital problem. We go farther, faster together with these sorts of things. And great events like this help begin the conversation of how we can do that better.
Tracy, how are you?
Well, I think about language, and looking at your slides, I didn't understand half of it. So that's a start, I think. And sometimes when you're talking to university, you need to speak their language. And so it's things like strategic enrollment management, it's housing master plans, it's education. We're educators by nature. So we're not as sort of, interested in the money to be made. I hate to put that out there, but we're more interested in what the student experiences and that they have a good time and that they return that to the university when they're done. So we have a very different value system maybe. And so sometimes it's how we talk to each other, and it's not saying we don't have the same goals, but sometimes we just need to watch our language.
Yeah, I'd say flexibility on the private sector side, and I think actually a lot of the companies that are used to working with universities have learned this lesson and are very flexible. But what U of T is doing downtown is very different to what U of T is doing over at University of Toronto Mississauga or Scarborough. What we're doing in Southern Ontario is very different than what other universities are doing and colleges are doing across Canada. Even in terms of how to structure the partnership, whether it's early stage pre-development work, whether it's, we're bringing someone in just for construction because we want to keep costs and timelines at bay. Are we looking for an operational partner at the end? We mentioned other types of university housing. It's not just student housing, which is a very specific subclass within multi-res. I mean, student family housing and faculty housing is a huge, huge problem on many campuses now. And understanding that product, right, which is more kind of purpose-built rental, and how to ultimately underwrite it and understanding that piece. I think, in addition to language and communication, being flexible and willing to kind of hear what the needs are of the university and how they could address those market gaps, I think is huge, and probably a good segue to Ali.
Yeah, and what I see happening out there with universities is great. There's a lot of shifts, and there's a lot of collaboration. We all have a vested interest. You need housing to grow your student base, or even just maintain servicing your existing student base. I think the one public sector we're missing in here, and maybe there's no one for municipalities, but I feel like they just continue to throw up roadblocks. A good example is we have a site at the corner of Gerrard and Sherbourne, which would work really well for a purpose-built student accommodation targeting Toronto Metropolitan University students. It's zoned for residential, so we cannot, build purpose-built student accommodation. And when we met with the city, I mean, there's a lot of similar characteristics of the two. They were generally opposed to it, but it's political in nature. It is, people around the area, residents who don't want students. Well, I look at that and I say, students are already living in your neighborhood. Why? We're in the midst of a housing crisis. Why not let them be in purpose-built accommodation to free up housing stock for everyone else? Another example, we have an SRA building right across from your downtown campus in Gastown, and the city of Vancouver stepped in to put rent control on SRAs and SROs. And for those of you who know, downtown east in Vancouver, it's a really sad situation. SROs have been underinvested. Many have caught fire, but there's a product type of SRAs that have actually been turned. They're servicing students of your university. And by imposing rent control on units versus individual leases, that deters that product from getting further investment, further addition into the marketplace. And so I think they need to be part of this equation too, and unfortunately, they have not been part of the solution.
I don't remember at the very first panel. I think, Ali, you were there. I was impressed. Grey Star, Brookfield, and all the gentlemen basically mentioned that we are on the same page to make the student experience better. Tracy, you shared with me the statistics you did that the students who have on-campus accommodation have better grades. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. So students who live on campus, international students mostly, at SFU do better academically by living on campus. So we've been able to do that kind of study. So there are certain students who benefit from being on campus and with the programs in place.
Mm-hmm. So I think we are on the same mission to make the student experience better, but we probably need to fine-tune the language, talk a bit more, right? And have a little better calibrated expectations about the pace, so universities don't move as fast probably as investors. But I think there is a hope, So my last question, as I got the indication we should progress, what is the next step so that the student housing can grow? What is your recommendation in general? Is it financing and banking better? Is it better zoning? Is it more working with the universities or government? What is the desire or suggestion for the next step?
Yeah, I think I covered it on my end. I think the universities just across the board and colleges are collaborating, far more with the private sector. I think in this current environment, having federal government support, I asked very early on as one question. What do we do about HST self-supply in a market where construction costs are increasing very heavily? The federal government and provincial governments are incented to deliver more inventory. It's the number one hot button political topic out there. We need to see more from them. And so I think that's the next step, because for a developer right now to pull a permit and construct is a very scary idea. And the problem is, without that support, our supply-demand imbalance will continue to grow.
I wholeheartedly agree with the pre-development period certainty. I mean, that's a huge one. I think, if what a big solve on our end would just be all-in upfront costs are it's cost prohibitive right now. We compete with condo developers downtown. Some sort of ability for the city, either through Create-to to unlock key pieces of land for affordable housing, which they're already doing, but student housing accommodation would be great. I don't know what the solve ultimately is, but on the construction cost inflation side, it's putting a huge, huge pinch on what we can ultimately charge, right? Because you're trying to balance the equation of construction costs to, can you actually pay the principal and interest and maybe even make a little bit of a return on top? And the construction cost inflation really is, it's pushing rents into potentially, uncharted territory that might not, seek the demand that we're seeing. So it's not really a solution. It's more of a problem set that I see currently. But the University of Toronto specifically, it does have quite a bit of land. We're very fortunate that we have actually a whole bunch of soft sites downtown that we can unlock. I think we're more fortunate than a lot of others. But it's great to see so many developers that are looking to partner with universities, vice versa. Hopefully we can get more government involvement specific on this topic.
Mm-hmm. Tracy.
I would just say keep the students first and first in mind. They could be part of the conversation next time we get together. I think they bring so many creative ideas and where they're at, and obviously we make generalizations about students, but as long as we keep the students first in mind, that's never steered me wrong in my career.
Great. Connor?
And maybe rather than a what's the way forward, because I think many others have answered that question a lot better than I can, is the why. And again, maybe it goes back to one of those questions Henry Morton asked earlier on, why get into this career and invest, your life into it. And I think it's partially because some of the great resources you shared here on the positive tailwinds and just how hard the problem is. And so, personally, and I think coming together here, I couldn't think of a more challenging problem to try to solve, but it's a really rewarding one, and there's positive tailwinds. And so that's definitely the why that's driving these sorts of conversations and why we're trying to make a better impact for everyone.
Gonzalo?
So my list is too long and lunch is ready. So I'm just going to go back to what I said. I think we need to learn a lot more about each other. And a really good example of what you guys were bringing up is Minister Fraser, Mendicino at the time, changed access into Canada for during COVID, gave students an exemption, because the sector stepped up and went to the plate and said, we need this, and this is why we need it, and this is why Canada needs it. This is what needs to happen now as well. And one other thing that I wanted to echo is, I love what you said about values. I'm a positive outlook type of person, so I ultimately believe that we all want to do good and be good. But we're all doing something here for different reasons, but we cannot deny that when a student is well, we are happy. When a young person goes through their life and is welcomed into Canada, or a Canadian student going into a residence and is able to undertake their studies because they're in a safe place and a place where they can enjoy everything, then it's a plus for all of us. The other thing that I heard earlier is the word green. And I think this is very important for us moving into the future as well, to take a look at, see what we can do as a segment of whatever this is. I don't know if it's financing or developers or education or whatever this is, to make sure that that becomes part of our mission moving forward. So more conversation and more learning.
Thank you all for sharing your wisdom and views, and please join me to appreciate it. Thank you.